All right, so we're going to go back. I'm still going to give you a little bit of time this morning. I will send everybody back to your team rooms, and then give you about 25 minutes, 20 minutes to go in and complete, and then we'll be moving on. Any thoughts? I know it's been a week since our last session. So any thoughts, any comments, any ahas between last time and today? Too many things? No, nothing?
I process slow, so give me a second. Just give me a second.
Okay, all right, all right. All right, so, okay, I'm gonna send you off to your teams here. And I'm gonna give you, like I said, 20 minutes to complete as much as you can on it. I mean, we'll have some more time. You can add stuff too. So you got 20 minutes, and I'll see you guys in 20 minutes. Hey, Eric.
Yeah.
So you can go look at the space, but I think you guys were done, right?
No, we still had a lot of homework to do, but I just got back to work. I've been evacuated for the last 2 days.
Understood.
For fires going on.
I can imagine you guys up there. So, all right, well, go in and do the best you can and as far as you can.
Okay.
All right?
All right. Sounds good.
All right. Just let me know. Just do a chat if you need to get a hold of me. I'll be bouncing around.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, thanks. You guys are done, right? Or you're almost done?
Oh, I went in this morning and finished up.
Okay.
Kevin.
We're just waiting.
Okay. All right. All right.
Is there anything else you want us to do on it while we're here?
Let me jump over to your screen here so I can look on the board. Make sure you guys you've added some assumptions to take a look at the risk piece as well and put some things in there. You can go ahead and do that. It looks like you got, again, yours is fairly straightforward, but you got your costs there.
So just add into the risk.
Yep. I think everything else you've got, you've already rolled everything up, right?
Yeah.
You have your total?
Yeah, all the totals are rolled up, hours and money.
Okay.
Hey, Jess, quick
Yep.
question. So the dollar amount in each sticky note should be the rate per hour or the total for that?
Total for that task or activity.
Okay.
Okay. So you're going to take the total hours that are in there and multiply them times whatever rate you guys have agreed on. And then, and that should be the total. And then you just roll it up.
Okay.
And you roll it up to the top level 2, and then roll it up to the very top, which is the total for the project. Now, in your case, you got labor hours for yourself, and then you have the total cost for the outsourced service.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Do you want us to designate those two separately or just include them together?
No, separate.
Okay.
Identify them separately. Here's our internal costs. Here's our external costs. This is what it should be costing us, because that's what you did, right? You kind of estimated what these subcontractors should be giving you a proposal for.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Do you want us to change the color of the cost designation or?
Just separate the numbers.
Yeah.
I mean,
Do we
pretty
need to
much.
label them somehow, or how do we know what's
Well,
what?
you can. So tell you what. Why don't you use use a separate color? Use if you're going to put them on the blue ones, go ahead and use yellow or some bright color.
Okay. Okay, so we'll do that for our internal costs.
Right. So keep the blue your internal costs. Use blue
Oh,
for your
blue.
internal costs, and then
Okay.
whatever other color you picked as your external cost.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right.
Video, write the welcome video script could be towards the top. It'd be a 2.2, so this would technically go up here. Record would go here. Upload and launch would go here. And test would go here. Could try to come on, renumber them.
We're just doing some cleanup, general cleanup, Jess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Crazy.
All right.
In theory, it shouldn't change the totals.
Correct.
Unless you're moving things between
The
Section.
grand total.
right phases.
It'll change the section totals, but it shouldn't change the grand total if we did our math right the
Correct.
first time.
Right. Right.
And Julie, are you aware of what one we shifted from one column to the next?
No, but I will pay attention for that.
So when you guys reach a point that you've settled on what the columns look like, go ahead and roll the cost, both the dollars and in your case, dollars and hours, because originally you guys had the hours in there. So roll both of those up.
We'll have to back check, but we did, yeah. We have a total right at the top here. All right. So $52 an hour. Determine onboarding specific objectives, scope of work to be done.
and groups of work allows you really to get to a level of detail and get a little bit more specific. I mean, you could probably take each one of these post-it notes. Remember when we presented the WBS, there's different levels you can take this to. We could take every single post-it note here and we could break it down even further to the minutia of just small day-to-day tasks, and then you can roll the whole thing up, right? But for the purposes of the class and sometimes at the project management level, you've got to manage what level of detail you get to before you're just getting too far into the weeds. But we're down at level 1. Some of these may go to level 2 a little bit here, but that's where you need to be. But yes, this is a standard way of approaching projects through our work breakdown structure. The caveat to what we do is we give you the tool and the view on how to go do that. And what we do is we use the post-it note process to go do that and put that together.
And is this Miro product something we would be able to use going forward, or would you recommend we do something different?
I'd recommend it. I mean, for working remotely, and there are different systems out there. There are project management tools out there, but they don't give you the ability to work interactively like this. So if you want to be able to work interactively, break down a project, put it together, and use the methodologies we've taught through the class to put a project together, Miro would be a good tool to go use. If you have the ability, policy-wise and company-wise, to be together in a room and doing it that way, you just mimic what Miro does, but you do it with physical Post-it notes. You're putting them up on a wall. What a lot of companies do is they create what we call a war room or a lean war room. And that is the room that is open and available for any team to go into, but it's set up purposely for the structure of using Post-it notes up on the wall. And a lot of people create a training room so they can reconfigure tables and chairs, multiple whiteboards. All the walls are cleaned off of space and painting, so it's just a working room to do all this type of work in.
Sure, we did that. We did that for the ERP project. We got a war trailer.
Yeah.
Brad, you haven't been out there? I got sticky notes all over that south wall.
Yeah, and it really a lot of
Does it
companies
just say eggs, milk, sugar? What is that?
Hey, I'm going down to the 5th level of detail.
You gonna bake a cake?
I start at the bottom, work myself up.
There you go.
The other question, I guess, I'm sorry, I'm kind of jumping out of our stuff here, so sorry.
No, that's okay.
The one other question I had was, are you familiar with Microsoft Project?
Yes.
Is that facilitator conducive to doing the same sort of stuff, or is that more Gantt charts and timelines?
Go ahead, Jess.
I was going to answer. So I'm going to show you today, in today's discussion, an example of what Microsoft Project, in Microsoft Project, they have the thing called networking or network. And the network is exactly what we're doing. It's these little blocks that you put information on, and then you link them together. And then that automatically generates the Gantt chart, which is what Microsoft, that's the first screen you go to that Microsoft goes to. So in the session today, I'm going to show you lots of Microsoft Project screens.
Cool.
And I'll show you the link from what we're doing to what it does with the Gantt chart. Like I said before, the challenge is that all the project softwares out there, it doesn't matter which brand it is, they all take you directly to the Gantt chart, and you start creating things in the Gantt chart without understanding the background and how you need to link things and how they're related. And they're not able to do it. They all are able to do it. It's just not where they take you because it's not a pretty picture. And so it can be a bit overwhelming when you look at the network. And that's why we do it using Post-its, because it's visible. Everybody can see it, can participate in it. The creation of the Gantt charts just becomes a lot easier if you do this on the wall or using Miro, or there's a couple other tools that are very similar to Miro out there, but it's very visible. People get to see it versus the one operator that it's operating Microsoft Project and is then entering the data.
The biggest, Brad, the biggest downfall I see to a lot of project management software that's used is it can be very powerful, but you tend to get forced into, okay, what's the schedule and what tasks need to do and when do we need to complete? And everyone's driving it like dates before they've even, if you look at what we've done here, we're into our 5th session and we haven't even talked about the date or a schedule yet, because we're just trying to understand, well, what are the activities, the times, and the resources? If you drive to a piece of software, project management software, it typically takes you right to the schedule piece, and everyone gets pigeonholed into talking about schedules versus, well, what are we actually doing, and what's the breakdown of the work? To do it right, you need to break down the work first. Highly recommend doing it in a piece of software like Miro, or doing it physically with Post-it notes so everyone's included on the same page. And then when you get to the point that you want to rotate this around 90 degrees and put it into a schedule, you can do it with the Post-it notes. Once you have a set plan, you may be able to then go manage it into the software after that and build what you have up on the wall as a starting point into the software. But the other piece to it on those pieces of software, they're very, very dynamic. They're very powerful, but not invariably, most people are not trained on how to go use them efficiently.
Yeah, that's the thing I was gonna
Yep.
ask about. We just started to kind of tinker with Microsoft Project.
What do you mean? I learned
your
it in
experience
15
with it?
minutes on YouTube.
There you go. And so there's the thing is, those Microsoft Project classes teach you how to use the software. They do not teach you how to plan, and they do not teach you
Right.
how to plan a project, right? So there is a disconnect. I mean, we have lots of clients. Oh yeah, we're proficient in project management because we've sent everybody to Microsoft Project class. And then you ask a simple question. You got 13 project managers. Why are they doing everything completely different? Right.
Yeah.
And so it's the fundamentals behind it. And that's really what the class is all about. That's why it's called practical. It's really, this is how you do it. All of this information, by the way, one of the reasons we are starting to really like Miro is that everything, all the Post-it notes and all the information on that you have up here on the tags, all of that can easily be extracted into a spreadsheet, which then can easily be uploaded into Microsoft Project. So all the data, the information related to the durations, the effort hours, and the resources can easily be uploaded using an Excel format. And so, which is, I've come to really, over the last 6 months, really come to like this tool, because before we used to manually enter all that stuff in, and now it just easily, right? So
you can take Miro, and it puts a line for every Post-it note or something?
no, what it does is it extracts it and creates, it extracts all the data elements off of each Post-it note and creates a field on an Excel spreadsheet automatically. And the other nice thing about this, we've also used it going the other way. Even if you do it on the wall with Post-it notes, you can take a screenshot with your phone, upload it into Miro, and it'll create the Post-it notes. Then you can download it via Excel. And we've done that with a couple clients too.
And after this is over, do we have continuing access to Miro, or do we need to buy?
You have access to the screen. If you really like it, I would recommend that you buy it. The way they work, it's by licenses, the number of licenses in a company. And so it depends on how many people you want to give access to. So the way it works is officially members. So Guy and Art and a couple other folks, so we have 5 licenses. So the facilitators have the license, but you can allow, just like I'm allowing all of you guys to go in there without it doesn't cost us anything. Right, so any guest can go in and modify it and do any of that, and there's no cost associated as long as they're in there as a guest. If they're in there as a team member, then there's I believe it's, what is it, $10 or $12 per license, per facilitator, I should say. That's a pretty good deal. We're really happy with this.
You can just, through one click or just a couple of clicks, you can get this to download to Excel, huh?
Yeah, and I can show you after we're done how to do that. It's really easy to do.
Yeah, that'd be great if you would. Yeah. I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, what you guys want to do is, as a company though, is set the standard on how project managers or how projects are managed in the business. Invariably, what we find in companies is every project manager is using every tool under the sun to get their job done. They're using Post-it notes, binder boards, on the wall, Primavera, Project, Excel, you name it, Smartsheet, and before you know it, they start wondering why is there this big variation between the success rate or the abilities of their project managers. And a lot of it comes down to the company hasn't set a standard on, when you are a project manager in the business, these are the tools you use, and we get you trained on them and make you expert. So that what it comes down to is, think about it, if you got 2 project managers, let's say for instance they were doing 2 ERP systems or different software modules. Well, how do you switch project managers between projects if they're using different tools, different functions, and different systems? It makes it very difficult to get them on the same page and transfer knowledge and information seamlessly.
Yeah, it seems like there's some good value in standardizing things.
Oh yeah.
That is more than just the software, but the software certainly can help with the standardization.
Yeah, well, so from a management perspective too, if you're looking for do report outs, and every month the project manager reporting out to you as a management team, If you have a certain methodology on how projects are managed, and there's an expectation there, when you come to that meeting, you're going to have very similar reports. The reporting should be the same. Here's my Gantt chart in this piece of software. Here's my Miro post-it note process and where I'm at. So you can actually measure the projects together and see where everyone's at. If everyone comes to that meeting with a different format and a different way of doing something, it wastes a lot of time in meetings explaining where the project's at.
Yeah, the other thing is this big project we're embarking on is, it's almost like 5 projects in one or 6 projects in one.
Yep.
So there's sort of like a master plan project with 5 sub projects that are so substantial.
Okay, it looks like we've got everybody back except Pep and, oh. I was gonna say, what happened to Chewy? He decided to stay in the room?
I work best by myself anyway.
Well, your name is Chewy, right? You're Jesus. I work best by myself too.
Yeah.
Right, guy? Who are we missing? Oh, I see. There's Susie. All right. Any questions on what we did? Anybody need to update their numbers? Change the numbers?
I have a question, Jess,
Yep.
but it's not really about it's more about the Miro board. So
Go ahead.
I don't know if anybody else experienced this, but we were done. And when we went in there to do some modification to a few things, a lot of our totals and numbers disappeared. So if people are hitting the back button on other work boards, we think it might be erasing what other people are doing. Because we had it all there even when you were in our room.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we went to start making changes, a lot of our values, our dollar amounts just disappeared completely. The tags were deleted.
The tags
So we're
were
not really
deleted.
sure how that happens because we had to go back through and redo a
Oh,
bunch.
so team 2, did you guys go through and delete some tags?
Not today.
Not today.
No, not that no, we didn't delete any tags.
But we also had one post-it that had a tag, 2 post-its that had a tag missing that I had to add in. It was 8 hours, I think.
So they were there and they were added up correctly, but then it changed during.
So what happened was some disappeared altogether. And then when we went back through and did the math again, some of the math didn't add up. So it's almost like somebody was going through editing and changing.
Yeah, so here's one of the catches with this, with the tags, right? If you go in and edit and it's an existing tag, it's going to change all the numbers that tag has. So if you're going to change a number, just create a new tag. And I think last time, I think it was Team 2 that discovered that. And we hadn't run into that issue in the past. But if you go in there and modify, right, a tag, an existing tag, it was already in the library, it will go through and change that tag whatever posted it was on, okay, if it was the same one. So that you got to be careful of doing, is that those tags, just create new tags. If you're changing, you can modify if you want to modify all of them universally. And so
yeah, also if you go in and you want to delete a tag, you can click on the tag itself to delete it, but right next to it there's this little pencil.
Yep.
And if you click on that, it deletes all tags that are the same. So if you have $100 and you delete that, but you hit the pencil, all $100 on the entire board go away. So don't hit the pencil. Whoever hit the
unless you meant to, unless you mean to universally change it,
right,
or delete it.
So I just want to put it out there. I'm no mathlete, but the math might be wrong at some point because
That's okay. We're gonna test that again here shortly, right? And so you have your budgets that you've identified and you got to post it. So everybody good with your budget right now? Because now we're going to start to break it down as we start shifting over to creating our schedule. So let me get PowerPoint back up. and let me share PowerPoint as we move forward with our next piece here. Everybody see the screen?
Yep.
All right. Any questions on what we just did? All right. Today is the 5th session, and we're still on, we're still on starting on step 3. So we got a lot of work to do in today and next week. So I hope you guys are ready for a lot of homework. I see Chewy saying, yeah, absolutely, bring it on. All right. Okay, now that we've identified our work breakdown structure, we've identified the resources, we've identified the effort hours, we identified the durations, now we can start putting together our actual schedule. Traditionally, this next step is where we start linking our activities. Right now, we have everything identified in columns in our work breakdown structure. So the work breakdown structure typically works in columns. We're now going to start shifting and looking at the work horizontally, because we're going to now create a timeline, and time flows from left to right. So we're now going to be moving, transforming our work breakdown structure into a timeline. So, but one of the key things we need to understand is what's the linkages of the relationships between each of the tasks or each of the activities. So each activity has a dependency that's either involved by an activity, a resource, and resource could be a person, or it could be equipment, okay? Or it could be a work product. So we need to understand that relationship. We need to understand the dependencies. Which one comes first before you can do the next one, or which ones are going to be going back and forth, right? So we need to understand that. Which ones have the same resources? Because if you have the same resources doing 2 different tasks, and they both take 8 hours, and you're both going to get, you're scheduling both of them to be done in one day, it's just not going to happen, right? So we need to start understanding these things. We also need to understand which of these tasks are independent, because there are some tasks that are independent. They just have to be done by the end, but maybe not necessarily between other tasks. So we need to understand those. We need to understand when they have to be done. And we also need to understand the relationship that we call finish to start, start to finish, start to start, finish to finish. We need to understand that. So when we look at task dependencies, there are only 4 types of dependencies. There is what is called finish to start. In other words, a task has to complete before the next task can start. So they're related. So the driver is the completion of one task before another one can start. Now we're also going to find that some of the tasks have to start at the same time, but don't have to finish. And that's referred to as a start-to-start relationship. And then we have other tasks that it doesn't matter when they start, as long as they finish at the same time before something else can start. That's referred to as a finish to finish. And then the one that confuses everyone is called a start to finish. So I may have a date in the future that's locked in place that something's going to start, but I've had this floating task, but I want that task to finish before that task completes. So that finish date is going to drive the start date of the predecessor. That one's a little more confusing, but if you do very large and complex projects, you will use that. Most folks are using the finish to start, start to start, and finish to finish. So those are the dependencies. Now we need to look at relationships. So what you see here at the top, this is the most common one that everyone wants their schedule to look like, and that is sequential, right? They want the task to be sequential. But more often than not, what we find is that there are several tasks that can be done in parallel. that are not related to each other. So this is also very, very common. And then the reality of life is we have lots of tasks that are in parallel, but also dependent on each other, on information going back and forth. So those have to go back and forth, and all three, in this case, all three need to go back. So this is sequential, parallel. This is referred to as coupled. They are all coupled together because there are interdependencies between each other. It could be the task itself. It could be the resource going back and forth. It could be a piece of equipment that gets utilized by each of those tasks. So you have to be conscious, especially of this, especially when you're putting a schedule together. Any questions on the dependencies and relationships? No? Okay. Look how quickly we finished step 3. Now we're moving on to step 4. We're really starting to pick it up here. So now we're going to get into the actual creation of the schedule, and that's where we're going to spend the rest of today, is in the creation of the schedule. The creation of the schedule and identifying the critical path and optimization. We're going to do all of those things at the same time. And so the steps, define activities. So we just spent the last 2.5 sessions working on the work breakdown structure. So that defines the activities. We're now going to move into what's called the sequence of activities. How do we put things together? The tools that we're using, the tools that you would normally use, what we have done in this practical class is we've kind of combined a couple of things, trying to kill 2 birds in 1 stone, because it's much more practical to do that than go off and create what's called a network chart or what's called a PERT chart. So PERT chart's an old term. It's linked to some royalty. So most companies and most software companies no longer use the term PERT because it's tied that anytime you use the term PERT, you have to pay royalties to a consulting company that created the whole concept. So Microsoft and every other software company out there refers to what used to be called PERT chart to a network chart, and it looks just like a network, and that's basically what it is. So we are going to do that kind of, as we're creating our Gantt chart. The timeline is typically shown on a schedule as a Gantt chart. This is a horizontal bar chart, basically, that shows the tasks, and it shows information associated. So we're going to be creating a Gantt chart as part of this process. And the actual schedule, for the most part, and I'm going to show you some examples of project software, predominantly what's out there in the market. The most common piece of software out there in the market right now is Microsoft Project. But there are a bunch of other companies out there. There are a lot of new companies that popped up over the last, say, 4 or 5 years that are now cloud-based type, what they call themselves project management software packages, kind of. They do manage and track things, just the visuals are different. But you're going to use some sort of project schedule, even if you use the most powerful tool on earth called Excel, right? So there are lots of tools out there. Excel is one, and I think I might have an example of an Excel chart, Gantt chart. It's easily done in Excel. The problem is there isn't the intelligence. You can spend a lot of time and hours creating the intelligence on a spreadsheet. Recommendation is find a real project software that really help you, project management software. So that's kind of the sequence. We're now going to jump into the activity, the network creation. We want to create the schedule. Schedules are representative usually of a Gantt chart. And if you look at the Gantt chart, typically, and it doesn't matter what software you're looking at, for the most part, if it has a Gantt chart, they look very similar. You see there's a task, the linkage, right? So this one right here is a start to start because this arrow represents a start to start relationship. This arrow here coming out of task A going to task B, this is a finish to start relationship. So that's how it would show up on the chart. This one here has a finish to start here, finish to start. By the way, the diamond The diamond is the milestone, and we're going to talk about the milestone. So tasks have duration. Milestones have zero duration. They're basically performance points in the timeline. And I've got a slide we're going to talk about milestones and how to create those. But again, is finish to start, finish to start. This one, okay, this is the B and E are tied together at the finish, so those both are finish to finish relationship. That's basically how you see the relationship on a Gantt chart between the task. Right? So it shows task dependencies, milestones. There are other shapes that can be added for a variety of reasons, but in general, that's what they look like. So on some Gantt charts, depending on the piece of software you have, some have summaries, some do not have summaries. This one here, this is a summary bar, and it's a summary of these 3 items underneath that. So you can summarize this up into this summary bar. The reason we do that, or the reason that exists, I should say, is that it allows you to generate different types of reports, Gantt chart reports. Now, for the individuals that are doing the individual task, you want to show them the task. But to management, they're not necessarily interested at the very detailed level. They just want to look at the summaries of all the tasks that are being done. And again, we'll do this because that summary bar, if you do it correctly, if you load all the information, the proper information, the dollars, the effort hours, the durations, all that information will also roll up into the summary bar. And that's why I had you to do that manually, because that's how the software will do it. It's going to summarize for each one of these tasks. It'll roll it up, and that summary bar will have not only the duration or the effort hours, but also the dollars associated with those tasks. So this is a Gantt chart. This is pretty typical of a Microsoft project. And again, you can modify the screens on Microsoft projects so you can customize it different ways. This is black and white, just a real straightforward. So over here, you have your tasks. This is your actual work breakdown structure, right? We talked about this earlier about the indented work breakdown structure. So here's your hierarchy. So this is corporate communications. So that's the parent. These are the children underneath that, okay? Advertising, children underneath that, public relations, right? So anything that's indented, you can see this is the parent-child relationship. Over here now is the time across the top. You're going to have a timeline. This one is in months, and it's broken down underneath in weeks, right? So that's the week of December 16th, the week of December 23rd, right? Again, the software will break it down any way that you like. And then again, now looking in, and we'll go start from the top, summary bar, okay? So marketing plan, distribution, had a target date of 3/17. This is a summary bar of all the tasks underneath that bar, which are all of these here, okay? Again, you can see the milestones. Milestones, if you use the software, are going to have very specific dates. Again, one of the reasons you use milestones is to measure performance, right? And you need to have more than one milestone, which is the end of the project. You need to have multiple milestones in between, or key milestones, so you as a project team can manage and see the progress. Again, this is a long bar here, okay? You can see the relationship, individual tasks are shown. Okay, so the arrows indicate the dependencies in the relationship between the tasks and the activities. Here's another one, same thing, it's still a Microsoft project, just looks a little different. Now, with this one, you see the red, because we're going to talk about the red. The red is my critical path, and we're going to talk about critical path. As a project manager, especially very complex projects, there's going to be lots of things going on, but there is what's called the critical path, that those tasks or those activities that are on what's considered to be critical to the project, if they slip, the entire project is going to be effective. So typically you can set it up that in Microsoft Project, and you can do the same thing in SureTrack, and you can do the same thing in a variety of other pieces of software out there where the critical path will show up in red. And so you can look at the Gantt chart and you see anything in red, I'm going to look at that first, and then I'm going to look at those other things to see where we are, right? And there's a couple of ways you can look at the critical path. Again, this is pretty typical. You have the duration. Well, if I see 0, those are milestones. If I see days in them, those are tasks, okay? If it's in bold, that's a summary, right? So anytime you see bold, that's a summary bar. And in this case, their summary bar is not the traditional. Again, you can select, you can customize it. In this case, they have a thin bar. And the purpose is as they start completing the work, that's going to be, I think I have another example that shows that in a minute. So there's a couple of ways you can set this up. And so here's the start date of that task, and here's the finish date. By the way, there's a lot more information. Your resource, effort hours, all that will show up. So the durations that we put into on the Post-it notes, once they're entered in, this is where they'll show up the duration dates. There is another column that shows the effort hours if you want to track the effort hours used. Typically, this is what is visible. This is the standard. You can always change what you see, add more columns. I always like to look at the duration and the effort hours. Now, there's a couple other screens you can go to look at the effort hours to see where they're coming from, which tasks, and so on. Those are separate ones. Again, Microsoft, when they created this, and this goes back to the first project software, which was I believe it was Harvard Projects was the original I remember seeing back in the late 80s and the early 90s. So, and traditionally, the screen was only wide enough to show this information, and that's why traditionally it's stayed. So this is one example. Here's another example. Yep.
Can you go back? Can you go back to 107? Slide 107.
This one?
Yeah. How do you have a summary that's shorter than a task?
So this has, yeah, this one here was manually entered because the dates are, this one doesn't show up, but the calendar date, this snapshot was taken in January. That's why the summary bar only goes to today's date. If I take the snapshot and today's the date, but the task started last week, it's not going to show me the summary task for last week.
Okay.
And that's the other thing you got to look at. These summary bars, again, can be adjusted and can be customized. That's why one of the important things when you go through this, if you're going to use software, everyone needs to use it the same way. So you need to standardize the setup for your software, because if you have multiple project managers, I've seen this happen, they can manipulate numbers, right, and adjust the numbers. But if you have a standard locked-in template that cannot be changed except for one person, then they're always reporting the same thing. So here's another one. Again, start dates. These actually have the times. Again, you see the same thing. Everything in red, though. This one shows the critical path in red. Now, this is the most powerful tool on earth. This is an Excel format. Yes, you can do it. You can. It takes some effort to create, but you can create a template. There's some folks in construction that still use Excel. We've had some clients pop it up, and so they've created a standard. Okay, that's great, but there are other tools besides Excel, but it can be done in Excel. Here's another one. This one actually shows progress. So you see the bars. You see the light blue in here. You see this one bar. Now, one of the critical things, and this is something that I criticize Microsoft. Microsoft does not establish what's called a baseline unless you manually go in there and save your schedule as a baseline. What does that mean? So a baseline is we do all this planning, and when we complete the planning, we now have a base schedule. As the project is progressing, things are going to change. If you have not locked down your schedule as a baseline, every time you have a change, the entire schedule is going to change. Okay, so back to Kevin, your point in regards to what was changing in Miro, Microsoft has the same challenge. If you do not save your project as a baseline, any information you put in, the original schedule is going to change, and the original schedule, you're not going to see your original schedule. If you have a baseline, what's going to happen, you will see the progress lines now show up inside your task activities and inside your summary bars. And that's what this is showing. And I think I have another shot that shows when they're late. This one shows they're progressing. They're still within their timelines. But this shows the progress. Oh, here's the other thing. And we're going to talk about measurements here next week. But one of the key measurements you need to have, well, are three key measurements. You need to understand the work, the percent of work completed, right, which is usually tied to a financial. You need to understand the duration, percent completed of duration, and you need to understand the percent complete of hours. The Gantt chart only shows percent complete of duration. It does not show percent complete of effort hours. Okay, that's important because I've often have seen reports of people reporting out where 80% complete. They may be 80% complete of duration, but if they only have 10% of the work effort completed, they're going to run out of time before they complete all the tasks. We need to understand that. Microsoft and all of the, I'm going to complain about all of them, all the software packages, unfortunately, do not show that information as a standard. You have to, which is one of the reasons I always have the column in there of I show percent complete of duration and percent effort hours and percent complete of effort hours. That way, as a project manager, I can look at those two numbers and say, if we're almost out of time and you're only 50%, we're at 90% duration complete, but only 50%, what are the odds that you're going to finish? Or what are the odds it's going to cost us more money to complete on time? Right? So these are the type of things you need to start looking at. And so just understand that the Gantt charts only measure duration. They do not measure effort hours. They do not measure dollars. That's somewhere else, unless you actually customize your screen. So here's another one. This one has the additional columns, predecessors and the resources assigned. Not only that, but you can also, if you notice on here, there are now names associated to it, or the resources now on here. Now I can actually show the resource on the bar to understand which resource is on that, or more importantly, this is actually showing the resource here is really talking about who's responsible. This is the builder, the builder, the builder. So Kevin, in your case, right, if you're using subcontractors, you have a bar, and you identify this is the landscape contractor. This is the paver, right? It's whoever it is. So you can now see which resource is performing which task or which activity. And it shows up. This is another one. This is SureTrack. This is another software. Again, very similar. Again, weeks and durations, the task, the resources are identified in here by code. Okay, time going across the top. Like I said, there are so many pieces of software out there. Just find one that you feel comfortable with and just make sure you standardize how it gets used and how the different pieces of the different screens in the different reports, make sure those are standardized so everyone's reporting consistently the same way. Otherwise, it's a matter, and then it becomes real confusing that on this report, percent complete was really effort hours, over here is durations. It gets rather confusing. So when we look at scheduling, we need to think about the decision-making process, right? We have to decide as we're creating the schedule what tasks have to be accomplished and in what sequence. And then what are the relationships? Because we're going to have to look at the people part, right? It's a key element is looking at the key, when we'll talk about critical chain, which is about resources, that if you don't keep an eye on the resource and understand the workload on the resource, that's where most projects, when we look at things, that's where most projects fall apart, because the same resource is assigned to multiple things to get done at the same time, and they don't have the bandwidth to complete that. Something is not going to meet the timeline. And so it's important we understand the resource side of the equation and not just the time side. This is, again, one of my criticisms of just looking at the Gantt chart. The Gantt, unless you have a column that shows or you've established that you're looking at the resource, it is not going to tell you, not on the Gantt chart, it's not going to tell you that your resources are overloaded. There's a whole other screen, there's a whole other report that generates that. But if you're trying to do everything on the Gantt chart screen, it's not going to tell you that. The other thing to look at is, again, the availability is critical. Not only availability of the individuals, but the other thing is the availability of equipment is the other area where we've seen a lot of issues occur in the past. If you got to bring in a crane, right, because you're lifting, right, the availability of that crane. Or if you have to use the forklift, where I've seen a lot is the use of the forklift. The use of the forklift is used for normal day in and day out operational work. But then when you're doing a special project, they're trying to schedule the forklift to come in and help you move a piece of equipment. And so that becomes a challenge, right? Especially when if you're in the middle of harvest, and you got to use all your regular operational equipment to fulfill your requirements for harvest, and you're also have to swap out equipment, that becomes a challenge. So make sure all of those things are understood from a critical resource perspective. We talked a little bit about comparing the baseline versus the actual. Make sure that we have a baseline. Every project, regardless, right? Some people get upset when I say you got to have a baseline, because you can hide your errors when you don't create a baseline schedule, because you're always going to be on time because the date keeps moving and all the tasks keep moving. It's not about baseline versus actual is not about blaming, and it's not about finger pointing. It's about understanding why is it that we're off, and how do we make sure the next time we do this, that doesn't happen. And we're not going to know what's the good, the bad, or the ugly unless we actually have a document that identifies and shows us the baseline versus the actual. And again, milestones, things may change in reality as you're executing the plan, but we need to understand why is that, because at the end, we need to understand why the schedule is way off, either way early or way late. We need to understand and ask the same question, why is that happening? So again, we've got to remember there are only 4 dependency types when we create our schedule. Now, remember this? I showed you this when we were creating the work breakdown structure. So this is the work breakdown structure. This is just one wall. And so we basically what we've done, and basically what you're going to do is we're going to take those Post-its and we're going to create our schedule. And so that schedule is going to look a little ugly. We're going to draw lines, right? This is when we do it on the wall. This is how we do it. Now, notice on here, I've got finish to finish, finish to start. I labeled some of these lines just to be clear because it's hard to see here, but this task and this task, it's a finish to start. So this has to finish before this can start. This has a finish to start, because some of these have multiple inputs, right? And so we're going to have to label those. And so, again, this is how we do it when we use Post-its on a wall. Miro, we're going to do the same thing, basically, except we're going to duplicate. And again, duplication is very easy to do on Miro, because all we do is click, and we have a duplication. When we did this, we had 2 people filling out the entire redoing or copying every single Post-it note so we can use it on the schedule. So there are some advantages of using Miro. Now, typically, if you're going to do the same thing. In Microsoft, there is a separate screen that you go in and create your network or your PERT chart. And you basically do the same thing. So we create, right, we take our work breakdown structure and say, as task number 1 has the duration, each one, right, each of these tasks, and then we say, okay, task 1, remember what I said, don't worry about the numbers because the numbers are going to get crazy here, right, because we're looking at the sequence. And so task 1, finish the start with task 4, finish the start, task 7, task 2 can start is a start to start, right? These two are not related, but it has a finish to start with task 5. But both of these have to finish at the same time before task 7 can start, right? And so we have task 3, task 6, right? And so basically we've got a lot of things happening parallel. So I'm assuming here the resources are, again, when we're looking at this, we're going to start look at from a task perspective, and then we'll do a pass as it relates to resources. But you can think about the resources as you're doing this. And then that links to task 8, which has to complete, and then that gives me my end date. So how that relates, this is now the Gantt chart. So the Gantt chart, we're now basically these 3 are right here. As you can see, they all start at the same time, but they all have different finish dates. We can also now see task 1 has that arrow going down to task 4. Oops. Right? So now all of a sudden you start to see the linkage. And it's all being driven by the duration dates. So what we looked at in the work breakdown structure of the WBS is that we roll up the effort hours. On the schedule, we're now looking at durations. So this has a 4-day duration. This has a 3-day duration. So this shows it day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. Okay, it ends at day 4. That's when task 4 starts. And there's 1, 2, 3 days there, right? So that's how we start aligning the scale. And so all the way through, so 1, 2, 3, 4, then task 4, then it'll go 3 days, 1, 2, 3. So then task 7, and you say, well, why is task 7 over here? Well, the reason task 7 is over there is because task 5, it cannot start until task 5 is completed. You see that down here? So again, it's the longest durations, right? So now durations, we're going to start adding durations. Milestones, okay? Again, milestones are tools that are used by project management and the team to identify points along the timeline to give us some understanding of how well we're progressing. You don't want to wait until the end of a project to see if you're on time or late. To be proactive, you want to pick some points throughout the timeline that you can then make some adjustments. And so it's extremely important that you pick multiple points. They could be task related, they could be budget related, they could be internal and external related. We always recommend putting progress meetings on your schedule. And what does that mean? If you get a 9-month project and you're meeting every other week, that you should have a milestone every week saying project review every other week, right? And that's a milestone because you're going to be measuring, because at that milestone, you should be making adjustments to what's happening to make sure you meet that end date. So make sure you add review meetings to your schedule, because as of right now, you have no review meetings on your WBS. Here's the other thing you're going to discover. You may have to break down some of those work activities that you have in your WBS a little bit further so you can actually put a schedule together, right? Or you're going to have to split some of those tasks or activities into 2 separate tasks because they may be tied to something different, right? So these are things that you're going to discover. Again, work breakdown structure, the objective there is to get us to between 60 to 80% of all the activities. When we get to the schedule, we may have to break that down a little bit further just because of what's driving that activity or what needs to be completed before that activity gets completed. Some advantages and disadvantages of a Gantt chart. The Gantt chart typically doesn't give you the same level of detail as the work breakdown structure. But again, if you do the work breakdown structure, you will have a good visual of the work from a timeline perspective. Gantt charts are easy to prepare, which is why we always say, start with the WBS. People always start with the Gantt chart, and the problem with starting at the Gantt chart, you're not going to break the work down to the level that you have a good understanding of the project. And this is where gaps are created, and this is where things fall through the crack. It's also easy to update. Once you set it up, it's just a matter of tracking and updating. And it's a good way to communicate. People look at the bar charts and say, okay, and if it has % completed duration, they look at that, okay, I can understand it without going into a lot of detail. The disadvantage, it really does not show you the true interrelationship between tasks and activities. And it doesn't tie back to the phases of the project. And that's the other thing you got to be careful of. Don't try to mimic the work breakdown structure on your schedule. On the schedule, it should be purely what tasks, what's the sequence, is it sequential, can it be done in parallel, are they coupled together? That's what the focus should be. It should not be on what phase it's coming from. The whole purpose of creating numbers in your work breakdown structure, if you're now going to track by phase coding from a financial perspective, that number becomes your phase, right? That number ties back to which phase it came from. And when I refer to a phase, I'm talking about whether it's phase 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The number just ties it back to, it has nothing to do with the sequence. Try not to put your number, your WBS numbers in sequence on your schedule. Schedule is purely related to what task has to be completed first before the next one, or what can be done in parallel, or what has to be coupled. It's not related to how you financially track. Questions on that?
So just to be clear, when you're doing the Gantt chart, at that point, you could actually change duration too, in case you have a project that has to be done, like say September 15th, and all of a sudden your finish date is October 30th. Can you mess around with the duration to hit that milestone?
So that is a very good question, and I didn't pay you for this. So that's exactly what I'm going to cover right now. So in step 5 is optimization. So we're going to do many passes, right? So the answer is you will adjust, but you're not going to do it when you do the first pass, okay? Because we need to understand, so anytime when we optimize the schedule, we're going to do multiple passes. The key thing in the multiple passes, we're going to do 2 specific passes to expose where and which tasks we have to change the duration. Because it's very easy to try to squeeze everything in without understanding what the impact is, right? And so there's 2 methods that are used for these multiple passes. So we're going to have to do multiple passes. We have to do a pass which is related to time, and we do a forward pass, and then we're going to do a backwards pass, and I'll explain what those are in a minute. So we do a forward pass from the start date. It's going to show that we're beyond the due date that we have on our project brief, okay? And then it's going to show us at how far or how close or how far it is, right? So that's a forward pass. Then we're going to come back and do a backwards pass from the due date going back. And then we're going to see which activities are the ones that we need to go adjust versus just shooting in the dark, right? So there is a methodology to doing that. So the answer, the end project because like you can do many passes. That's just the time pass. Then we got to look at the resource pass, because when you do that, maybe there's no problem with resources when you're doing a forward pass. But when I do a backwards pass, now all of a sudden, it's not just a duration, I got a resource problem, right? So it's going to expose both of those issues when you do a forward pass first and then a backwards pass, and then you make the adjustments. Then you can decide, and that's why the assumptions now, my expectation, you guys start writing assumptions in the assumptions and the risk is, the risk associated when you do a schedule is these overlaps, not having clear overlaps. Now, by doing a forward pass and a backwards pass, I can start making some decisions as to which tasks, and when we have to make those adjustments, and not just start looking at shrinking everything. So we got to make sure, it's important that we understand both the resource side, the effort side, and the duration side, right? It's important to identify what degree of freedom we have, right? Which is why we do a forward pass and do backwards, because some tasks, doesn't matter where you have them, so those are easily moved around. Other tasks, you're going to have to make some hard decisions about durations, or you're going to have to readjust the sequence of work. And you have to look at the resource. So typically what we do is we're going to do that as part of today. We're going to start, I'm going to give you your project start. All of you have a project start date of September 15th, which is Tuesday next week. That is your start date. You now you've defined in your project brief the deadline. You're going to map going forward, and if you land outside of that late, that's okay. We know then you have to make some adjustments, right? And then we're going to go backwards from the due date, and we're going to see where the overlap is. You're going to quickly see where maybe your durations were a little too optimistic, or a little too conservative, too much padding, and then you start looking at that. And then from a technique, you're going to look at the effort hours and the duration. If you've got 8 hours but 3 weeks to complete 8 hours, you have to make a conscious decision. How am I going to squeeze? Is it because I have one person doing it? What if I have 2 different people? What if I have a different person? I can now get that done in 3 days instead of 3 weeks, right? You have to make conscious decisions and not just try to squeeze it in for the sake of squeezing it in, which is a mistake that happens a lot when people go straight to doing a horizontal the time. They're so focused on trying to make it fit, they're not looking at the impact of the actual work or the actual resources, and that's where they get in trouble. So this allows you to expose those before you get to that point. This is why planning is so important up front, not during the project. So forward pass. So a couple key things. We do a forward pass. We start from the start date we identified and go forward. It ends where it falls, wherever it falls. What it's going to give us is a couple of things. So when you do a forward pass, any tasks that are any tasks that can be moved, don't have specific deadlines to, that's considered float. So those tasks have float. When we do the backwards pass on the schedule, okay, any task or activity that's allowed to move around, that's considered slack. When we're looking forward, it's called float. When we're looking backwards, it's called slack. It's the same thing, so don't get confused. So it's one of these PMI things where they came up with it's very specific, but it's exactly the same thing. It's just an activity that can move that's not going to impact anything on your schedule. So keep that in mind, right? So we need to understand that. But again, like I said, more importantly, what's going to happen, you're going to identify the gaps between the forward and the backwards pass, and it's going to help you adjust, make some decisions about which tasks need to be adjusted either in duration, or I'm going to have to find more resources to get that work done. Any questions on that? Wow, look at this. We're up to step 6. We're moving really quick. Now, one of the other things that we have to do as part of the scheduling piece is we need to identify where is our critical path. Which path do we really need to pay attention to? And so we need to understand the definition of the critical path. in simple terms, the critical path is considered to be my longest path that's tied together. And so if we look at this chart, how many paths do I have on this chart? It goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. How many different paths? 2, right? 2 paths, right? So I have 2 paths. So let's understand how long each one is, okay? So path 1, 2 plus 5. That's right, 7. 7 plus 2, 9 plus 1 is 10, right? So this one is 10. 2 plus 5 is 7, plus 7 is 14, plus 2 is 16. Which one is my longest path? The second one, right? 16 days versus 10 days. So I really have to pay attention to this path as a project manager. Because if that slips, that's going to be late. If this one slips, I got 6 days, right, between this. So if this path is 2 days late, I'm fine. Or 3 days late, I'm fine, because I have 6 days worth of float or slack. If I go backward to slack, if I go forward to the float, in there that this can be completed. So I have to make sure I understand that. So we have to identify our critical path. And the critical path is the longest route. So here's another little exercise. Walk through.
Wouldn't you,
go ahead.
Jess?
Yep.
Wouldn't you have to also identify the resource for each path? So if it's the same resource for path 1 and path 2, it doesn't matter if path 1 is late, because then that prolongs your project as well, doesn't it?
Yes, so you're absolutely right. But the first pass, just like the first pass we do, we look at critical path. And critical path does not look at resource. So when we look at critical path, even the software, when the software looks at critical path, it is only looking at the durations. It is not looking at the resources. So that looking at the resources is called critical chain. And we're going to talk about that in a couple of slides here. We have to look at both. But I want you to understand that when, and this is one of the issues with software. Software will only look at critical path, and it's only based on duration. It is not based on the resource loading, okay? That's called critical chain. And so in the critical path, like this instance here on this one, right? So we've got basically how many different paths? We got 4 different paths, right? We got A, D, H, J, that's 1. We got B, E, H, J, B, F, J, C, G, I, J, right? So the first path that goes across the top, that one's 14 days. Second path, which is this one with the red arrows, it's got 16 days. And then you got one that's 9 days going straight across, and you got the last one that's 14 days. Again, critical path only shows you the longest path, and it's only based on duration dates. And that's the other thing, duration dates, not on effort dates, it's on duration dates. Again, critical path is focused strictly on looking at the longest sequential path based on duration. It does not, right? It assumes, this does not assume limited resources. So we need to then move on to critical chain. Critical chain now is looking at resources, right? We now have to look at resources. And on this chart, the resources are colored. There's resource A in red, B in black, C in blue, and D in magenta, right? So you have to look at, here's A, he's got, this person A's got 2, is involved in 2 of these routes, right? So they would do the shortest one first, come back and then do the longest, right? So they go, it'll be 5 days here, come back at another 8 days, right? So this is already late, right? 5 plus 8, we're already late, right? Here, one person's got 9 days, and then over here, so that's no problem, right? So they do the 9 days, then they go do the 6 days. But this means this person gets done early, and then comes back and starts this. That can't move until this is completed, right? So we have to look at the resources. Then you look at blue. Blue's got 5 going this way, then got to come back and do this, and you got 4. So we got to look at each one of these. And so if we look at critical path is only 15 days. If we just purely go through the duration days, it's 15 days. But when we start taking into account the resources, it's now 21 days to get this done. And so if you only plan on critical path, we're going to be 6 days late because of the resources. So we have to do both. We have to look at both the resource and we have to look at the durations. So yes, identify your critical path, but we're going to be looking at your resources. The best thing to do as part of this, as part of creating your schedule, is after we do the forward and the backwards paths, is to start looking at your resources, especially as you're trying to adjust, is do both at the same time, duration and your resource. So in Microsoft, it looks like this. Their network diagram, once again, you can customize it any way. You expand it, but it shows the task, the start date, end date, okay? The duration for each one. And again, software only looks at the durations. It does not look at the resources. It does generate a resource chart that shows the resources. All it does is shows the resources are overloaded, but it doesn't tell you where they're overloaded. So again, this is something to be aware of. Primavera is the only software that does that. That's an Oracle piece of software. But you're paying like $60,000 a license. It is outrageous. But it is a piece of software that works very, very well for very complicated projects. Most of where we've seen Primaveras in the defense industry or very complicated building aircraft, building trains. Some construction organizations use it, but most folks are using the Microsoft project products. So when we look at this, we need to take into account is when we look at critical path, we also need to understand that are there things that we have to sit and wait for? You know, at Disney, when they grow grass, of course now it's a lot easier because it doesn't take that long, but if you have to grow grass, you got to schedule it. If you're painting, right, you're going to have cure time. That duration is not going to change, and you need to be aware of that. Maybe the effort to paint it is not a big deal, but if you don't have a separate post-it that says cure time for the paint, you got to make sure that's included someplace. And if you're assuming you included that in the paint the lines on the parking lot as an example, the duration to cure the paint needs to be in there, right? And so you've got to be aware of these things, that if anything requires time to either cure, to grow, whatever that may be, make sure that duration is fixed and you don't just start squeezing that as well. Any questions? Okay, I'm going to show you one more thing because I'm going to turn you loose on your projects. Can you see my screen? All right, so your table looks a little different than this one here. It's basically just 2. So actually I should pop back to, can you see the screen? Did it change on you? Okay, so I've now opened up your timeline. So you've got, I think I asked you to keep the project short, under 6 months if possible. This goes out 30 weeks, okay? And so you're gonna, all work starts on September 15th, so week 1. So that's week 1, and it goes from there, okay? And so that's open for everyone. What you're going to do is you're going to copy. Now I'm gonna bounce back over here to this other one so I can show you. So we did the same thing here. Okay, so here, week 1, they actually had the dates in here. Week 2, 3, 4, 5 with the actual dates. Basically said, okay, team, what's the first task we need? And so this one was this particular project's selection of an LMS system. And the first thing they said, okay, the first thing we need to do is create a spreadsheet with LMS features. And so, okay, so come over here. Where's that at? Work breakdown structure. I think they took this one right here. Said, okay, we're gonna duplicate. Go into duplicate. Take that. Go over. And basically paste it here. So what you're gonna do is, each one of these blocks is 5 days, 5 working days, right? It's 5 working days. So this is week 1, week 2, there's 5 working days. And so when they started, it was at the end of the week. This has 1 day. So, and then they went and identified 5.1, determine what functionality is going to be needed in the next 3 years. And it was going to take a day to do that. You look at duration. Don't look at the effort hours. Look at duration. And so if it's sequential, right, place those back to back like this. That shows sequential, okay? So this goes sequential all the way through. These are done in parallel. These can be done in here. They're not related to this, but they can be done anywhere in here. So these were identified. The reason these are red is because this one's already identified as that's the critical path. These can float anytime in here as long as it gets done at the same time this 4.2 gets done, right? This is all sequence. So if you have a day, you can't have more than 5, right? If this is a day, this is a day, this was 20 hours, okay? This was, from a duration perspective, was 20 hours, right? So again, you add the hours in here, they were all 1 day, so they all get done. Same thing here, right? So that was absolute 1 day completion there. Milestone, identify a milestone, their milestone. This is the milestone to complete. So this one said 1 day, so this is the following Monday or Tuesday. That's the milestone. Once that milestone is completed, then these other tasks can begin. So this task continues on, right? Back to back, 3 weeks. This is Monday. They make the decision. Monday was the decision day. You got 3 days. These happen. This one has 2 days. So there's 2 days between here and the end. This was done on Friday, but these 2 have to be done before they can go to this one. Another milestone, the selection of the top 3 systems, and then they go into a trial period. Okay, at the same time, concurrent, this is going on. This trial period is got 3 days worth of work. So this starts Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So the next real activity cannot start until the following week unless these are done in parallel. This one is really part of this evaluation. So that gets done inside of this 3-day period. This gets done in that period because these happen together. They're done in parallel. This is in parallel, completely free, as long as it's done before the end, before you start this next one, right? And so on and so forth. That's what I want you to do. In their case, they actually beat the deadline, which was 7/31, and they beat it first pass based on their schedule. And in reality, they were off by a week. So they missed it. I think it got done like the 22nd. but that's what you're going to do. Make sure all of these are in the WBS. They basically duplicated them, brought them over, and dropped them in place. You have to decide to do a forward pass from the start date. And so the start date was the 11th, I think was the day that they started this, on the 11th. So that's why it was the last 2 days of the week, and that's why it starts there. But bring it over, place it, and if they're sequential, just make sure they're tied next to each other. Point of caution, these lines will move if you push them. Make sure you swing around to the other side, otherwise you're going to be pushing when you're trying to get them over on the other side. If they don't fit and this is pushing too far out, change the size of your Post-it notes to fit them in those areas. Questions? So going back to here, that's what you're going to do. Then as you go through assumptions, okay, assumptions on your schedule piece, list them down here. So the assumptions are related to both WBS and schedule. So you guys will have basically, I'm going to let you run for about an hour and a half. We'll take a quick break right now. And an hour and a half will put us close to 11:20. Actually, I'll come around and check in. I might have us all check in together in an hour or less, just to see how things are going. But I will give you, well, let's do this. I'll have you guys check in an hour, and then we can continue to go. But for right now, let's do this. Let's take a short break. It's 9:40. Everybody back by 9:50. And then I'll send you off into your teams. Then we get started.